I glanced at the clock again. 8:47 p.m. She was supposed to be home by 7 o'clock. I'd timed everything about this celebration perfectly, even accounting for her usual fashionably late arrival. But this was excessive, even for her. My phone buzzed with a text message, a brief, impersonal update. Stuck in a meeting. Be there ASAP. Don't wait up. Don't wait up. Those 3 words echoed in my head, a familiar refrain in the symphony of our marriage. I sighed, blowing out the candles, the romantic ambiance instantly dissolving. The salmon, now cooling, seemed to mock my efforts. It was just another Tuesday, really. Another night where Victoria's career took precedence over everything else. I wasn't resentful of her ambition, far from it. I admired her drive, her intelligence, her relentless pursuit of success. But somewhere along the way, her success had become the success, eclipsing everything else, including us. Including me. My phone rang, and for a hopeful second, I thought it might be Victoria, perhaps with an apology, an explanation. But it was Mr. Harrison, her boss. His booming voice filled the room, even though Victoria wasn't even there. I could hear the clinking of glasses, the muffled chatter of a celebratory gathering, a celebration I wasn't a part of. Though absolutely crucial to the Henderson account. Brilliant presentation, Victoria. Key player. The snippets of conversation drifted in and out, each word a tiny pinprick to the already deflated balloon of my evening. I cleared my throat. Mr. Harrison, it's Daniel, Victoria's husband. She's, still on her way. There was a brief pause, a flicker of annoyance on the other end. Right, Daniel. Tell her to call me as soon as she gets in. This is critical. And then, without another word, he hung up. I placed the phone back on the table, the silence of the apartment suddenly deafening. I stared at the carefully prepared meal, a physical manifestation of the effort I consistently put into our relationship, an effort that consistently went unnoticed. It hadn't always been this way. We'd met in college, both bright-eyed and full of dreams. I, a budding graphic designer with a passion for art, and she, a fiercely intelligent economics student with a laser focus on the corporate world. We were different, yes, but our differences had initially drawn us together. A magnetic pull of opposites. I was the calm to her storm, the quiet observer to her vibrant energy. Or so I had thought. My mind drifted back to a pivotal moment, 3 years into our marriage. I'd been offered a dream freelance project, designing the branding for a new, innovative art collective based in San Francisco. It was a chance to work with some incredible artists, to build my portfolio, to finally step out of the shadows and into the spotlight. But it would mean moving, temporarily, across the country. It's an incredible opportunity, Victoria, I'd said, my voice brimming with excitement. I spread out the sketches and mood boards across our tiny kitchen table, eager to share my vision. Victoria, however, was less than enthusiastic. She barely glanced at the designs, her eyes glued to her laptop screen. San Francisco? Daniel, that's across the country. I can't just pick up and leave. My career is here. I know, I'd said, trying to keep the disappointment from creeping into my voice. It's just for 6 months. Maybe a year. We could make it work. Long distance, visits. She'd finally looked up, her expression a mixture of pity and exasperation. Daniel, be realistic. I'm on the partner track. I can't just disappear for a year. This is my career we're talking about. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Your career isn't as important. In the end, I'd turned down the project. I'd told myself it was the right thing to do, that supporting Victoria's dreams was just as important as pursuing my own. But a small part of me, a part I'd tried to ignore, had withered that day. That wasn't the only sacrifice. There were the countless late nights I spent alone while she worked, The weekends I spent running errands and managing the household so she could focus on her climb up the corporate ladder. I'd become the silent, supportive partner, the invisible stagehand, ensuring the spotlight always shone on her. I'm standing in our tiny kitchen at 2 a.m., the rhythmic chopping of vegetables the only sound. Victoria is asleep, exhausted from another 14-hour day. I'm prepping her lunch for tomorrow, a healthy, balanced meal she probably won't have time to fully appreciate. My own freelance work is piled up, deadlines looming, but her needs always seem to come first. I stifle a yawn, the fatigue a constant companion. Even social events became an extension of her career. We're at a stuffy corporate party, surrounded by Victoria's colleagues. I'm making polite conversation, trying to blend into the background. Victoria, however, is in her element, networking, charming, and effortlessly navigating the corporate landscape. I watch her, a mixture of pride and quiet loneliness swirling within me. She introduces me as my husband, Daniel, without mentioning my profession, as if my identity is solely defined by my relationship to her. I feel like an accessory, a plus one, not a partner. And the birthdays, it's my birthday. Victoria hands me a neatly wrapped gift. Inside is a high-end leather briefcase. "I thought you could use this for client meetings," she says with a smile. It's a practical, expensive gift, but it misses the mark entirely. I haven't had a face-to-face client meeting in months. I'm an artist, not a businessman. I force a smile and thank her, burying the disappointment. I don't even bother mentioning the art exhibit I'd hinted at wanting to see. The present snapped back to me. The cold salmon, the silent apartment, the weight of years of quiet compromises. I picked up my phone and opened my freelance design app. The project I was working on, a logo design for a local bakery, stared back at me. It was competent, professional, but lacked any real spark. Just like my life, I thought bitterly. Needing a break, I decided to get some fresh air and grab some art supplies. Maybe a change of scenery would help. I headed to a small, independent art supply store in a nearby neighborhood, a place I'd discovered a few weeks ago. It was a haven, filled with the intoxicating scent of paint and paper, a world away from the sterile corporate environment that consumed Victoria's life. As I browsed the aisles, I noticed a woman, likely the owner, helping a customer. She had a warm smile and an easygoing manner, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, revealing a delicate silver earring shaped like a paintbrush. This was Olivia. "Those charcoal pencils are excellent," she said to the customer, her voice soft and encouraging. "They're perfect for capturing subtle gradations of light and shadow." I paused, listening to her explanation. She spoke with a passion that resonated with me, a passion I felt slipping away from my own work. When the customer left, Olivia turned to me. "Can I help you find anything?" "Just browsing," I replied, feeling a bit shy. "But I was admiring your selection of charcoal pencils." She smiled. "They're a favorite of mine. Are you an artist?" The question, so simple, yet so unexpected, caught me off guard. I hesitated, then said, I dabble, mostly graphic design these days." "Ah, a fellow creative," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Don't underestimate the power of dabbling. Sometimes the greatest works come from those quiet moments of exploration." She gestured to a wall displaying local artwork. "We have a small gallery space here. We're always looking for new artists to showcase." "Oh, I'm not sure my work is gallery-worthy," I mumbled, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "You never know until you try," Olivia said with a gentle shrug. "Feel free to bring something by sometime. I'd love to see it." The conversation was brief, but it left me feeling strangely energized. It was a small spark of encouragement, a reminder of the passion I'd buried under layers of compromise and self-doubt. Back at the apartment, the celebratory dinner remained untouched. I scraped the food into the trash, the metallic clang echoing in the silence. Just then, Victoria burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "Daniel, you won't believe it!" she exclaimed, her voice breathless. "They're considering me for the London office. It's a massive promotion, a vice president position. It's everything I've ever wanted." She was beaming, radiating ambition and triumph. She hadn't even noticed the discarded dinner, the extinguished candles, the palpable air of disappointment. I forced a smile. That's great, Victoria. Congratulations." "It's more than great. It's phenomenal," she said, pacing excitedly. "This is a game changer. London. Imagine the opportunities, the connections." She continued to talk, outlining her plans, her vision for the future, her future. I listened, my heart sinking with each word. There was no we in her plans, no consideration for my life, my work, my dreams. It was all about her career, her success. "So," she said finally, turning to me with a bright, expectant smile, "what do you think?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think it's amazing, Victoria. A real achievement." She beamed, clearly expecting me to be swept up in her excitement. "I know, right? It's going to be intense, a lot of long hours, but it'll be worth it. The salary increase is substantial, and the exposure—" I tried to interject, to voice my concerns, my anxieties, but she cut me off. "We'll need to start looking at apartments, researching schools for the— Well, we can talk about that later. The important thing is, I have the final interview next week. It's practically a formality, but I need to be prepared." "Victoria," I said, my voice firmer this time. "London is a big move. What about us?" She looked at me, a flicker of impatience crossing her face. "What about us? We'll be fine. You can work remotely, right? Your freelance thing, it's perfect for this." "It's not just about the work, Victoria," I said, my voice laced with frustration. "It's about my life, my connections, and everything." "Don't be so dramatic, Daniel," she said dismissively. "This is a huge opportunity for me. You should be supportive." That word, supportive, hung in the air, a loaded weapon. I'd been supportive. I'd been nothing but supportive, to the point of sacrificing my own dreams. And yet, it was never enough. The next few days were a blur of tense silences and one-sided conversations. Victoria was completely consumed with preparing for her final interview, leaving me to grapple with the impending upheaval of my life. I confided in Sarah, my friend and occasional freelance collaborator. "She's not even considering your feelings, Daniel," Sarah said, her voice filled with concern. "You've always put her first. When is it going to be your turn?" Her words resonated deeply, confirming the doubts that had been swirling in my mind. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of confronting Victoria, of potentially ending our marriage, filled me with dread. The day of Victoria's interview arrived. She left early, dressed in her sharpest suit, her eyes gleaming with ambition. I watched her go, a sense of finality washing over me. Later that evening, she returned, radiating triumph. "I got it, Daniel. I got the job. We're moving to London." She threw her arms around me, expecting a celebratory hug, but I remained stiff, my emotions a tangled mess of sadness, anger, and a strange sense of relief. "Victoria," I said, gently pulling away, "I'm not going." Her smile faltered. "What? What do you mean you're not going?" "I mean, I'm not moving to London. I'm staying here." "But why?" she asked, confusion clouding her features. "This is my dream, our dream." "No, Victoria," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "It's your dream, and I'm tired of living my life for your dreams." Her face hardened. So, you're not coming? You're choosing to stay here, alone, instead of supporting me? That word again. Supportive. It was the final straw. Victoria, I've supported you for 7 years. I've put my own career on hold. I've managed our lives. I've done everything to make your dreams a reality. But you've never once considered mine. This is my life, too, and I'm choosing to live it, for myself. She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. So that's it? You're just giving up on us? On our marriage? You gave up on us a long time ago, Victoria, I said, my voice filled with a quiet sadness. You just didn't realize it. This is because I am successful, isn't it? You are intimidated, she spat. No, this is because you don't care. You did not ask me once. You did not even think of considering my thoughts. Victoria scoffed at this, in clear disbelief that I was not agreeing with her. You are being so difficult right now. Fine, I am going. Stay here. She stormed off to her bedroom. I started to gather my things. A small bag will be enough. Most of my important possessions are at my parents' house, and that includes my art. And just like that, I walked out. The first few weeks after leaving Victoria were a blur of numb disbelief and quiet despair. I moved into a tiny, one-bedroom apartment, a stark contrast to the spacious, modern home I'd shared with Victoria, a home that had never truly felt like mine. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, and the silence, once a welcome respite from Victoria's constant activity, now pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. I'd packed light, taking only the essentials: clothes, my laptop, a few cherished books, and, most importantly, my art supplies. The box containing my paints, brushes, and sketchbooks remained unopened, tucked away in a corner, a silent testament to the part of myself I'd neglected for so long. I went through the motions of daily life, eating, sleeping, working on the occasional freelance project, but my heart wasn't in it. The joy, the spark, had gone out. I felt like a ghost, drifting through my own existence, haunted by the ghost of my marriage. Sarah, my closest friend, was my lifeline during those dark days. She had known me since college, before Victoria, before I'd become the shadow of my former self. She listened patiently to my rambling thoughts, my regrets, my anger, and my sadness, offering a comforting presence and a much-needed dose of reality. "You need to grieve, Daniel," she said one evening, as we sat on the floor of my sparsely furnished living room, sharing a takeout pizza. "It's okay to feel lost, to feel hurt. You've just gone through a major life change." I know, I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's just, I feel like I wasted so many years, like I put my life on hold for someone who didn't appreciate it." "You didn't waste anything," Sarah said firmly. "You loved her, you supported her. That's not a waste. But now it's time to focus on you. What do you want, Daniel?" That question, "What do you want?" hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation. I hadn't asked myself that question in years. I'd been so focused on Victoria's wants, Victoria's needs, that I'd forgotten my own. I don't know," I admitted, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I used to want to be an artist, a real artist, not just a graphic designer doing corporate logos." Sarah smiled. "Then be an artist, Daniel. You have the talent. You have the passion. Don't let it go to waste." Her words, simple yet profound, struck a chord within me. It was as if a tiny ember, long dormant, had been rekindled. The next day, I finally unpacked the box of art supplies. The familiar scent of linseed oil and turpentine filled the air, a comforting aroma that transported me back to my college days, to the time when art was my life, my passion, my everything. I set up a makeshift studio in a corner of the living room, using an old table I'd found at a thrift store. I spread out my canvases, my brushes, my paints, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of excitement, a sense of purpose. I didn't have a grand plan, no specific subject in mind. I just started to paint. I let my emotions guide my hand, pouring my grief, my anger, my confusion, and my nascent hope onto the canvas. The colors swirled and blended, a chaotic yet beautiful representation of my inner turmoil. I painted for hours, losing myself in the process, oblivious to the passing of time. When I finally stepped back, exhausted but strangely exhilarated, I was surprised by what I'd created. It wasn't a masterpiece, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was honest. It was raw, vulnerable, and undeniably mine. Over the following weeks, I continued to paint, to draw, to create. I experimented with different styles, different mediums, rediscovering the joy and freedom of artistic expression. I wasn't creating for clients, for approval, for anyone but myself. It was liberating. A few weeks later, I found myself drawn back to the little art supply store, the one where I'd met Olivia. I needed to replenish my supplies, but I also felt a subconscious pull, a desire to reconnect with the woman who had, in a small but significant way, encouraged me to reignite my passion. As I walked through the door, the familiar scent of paint and paper washed over me, a comforting embrace. Olivia was behind the counter, arranging a display of new brushes. She looked up, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Daniel, it's good to see you again," she said, her voice genuinely welcoming. "How are those charcoal pencils working out?" "They're great," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. I actually came to get some more, and..." I hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I also wanted to thank you for your encouragement. It meant a lot." "You're very welcome," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Have you been working on anything new?" I nodded, feeling a surge of confidence. "Yeah, actually. I've been painting a lot. It's been good for me." "I'd love to see it sometime," she said, her gaze sincere. I meant what I said before. We're always looking for new artists to feature. We chatted for a while longer, discussing art, life, and everything in between. There was an easy, natural connection between us, a shared understanding that transcended words. I felt comfortable, seen, appreciated for who I was, not for who I was supposed to be. A few days later, a local art fair was being held. Taking a leap of faith, I decided to participate, setting up a small booth to display and sell some of my recent work. It was a nerve-wracking experience, putting my art out there for public scrutiny, but it was also exhilarating. To my surprise, my work was well received. People stopped to admire my paintings, to ask questions, to express their appreciation. I even sold a few pieces, a validation that I hadn't expected but deeply cherished. And then I saw her. Olivia. She was walking through the fair, her eyes scanning the various booths. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Daniel, this is wonderful!" she exclaimed, gesturing to my display. "Your work is even more impressive than I imagined." We spent the next hour talking, surrounded by my art. Olivia's genuine enthusiasm and insightful comments boosted my confidence even further. She introduced me to a few other artists and gallery owners, expanding my network and opening up new possibilities. It was during that art fair that I met Liam. Optional edition, can be removed or added to smoothly. He was an older, established artist, known for his bold, abstract paintings. He stopped by my booth, studied my work with a discerning eye, and then turned to me with a knowing smile. "You have something special, young man," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "Don't let it go to waste." We talked for a while, and Liam offered to mentor me, to share his knowledge and experience. It was an incredible opportunity, one that I gratefully accepted. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Victoria's life in London was a far cry from the glamorous, successful existence she had envisioned. While her initial months had been marked by accolades and rapid advancement, the tide had begun to turn. The pressure was relentless. Mr. Harrison, her boss, was even more demanding than he had been back home, constantly pushing her to achieve unrealistic targets. The corporate culture was cutthroat and competitive, with colleagues vying for power and recognition. She missed Daniel. She missed his quiet support, his unwavering belief in her, his ability to make her laugh even when she was stressed. She missed the simple comfort of his presence. But she was too proud, too stubborn to admit it. She had made her choice, and she was determined to make it work. Back in my new, blossoming life, my confidence continued to grow. I was spending more and more time with Olivia, our connection deepening with each passing day. We went to museums, explored hidden art galleries, shared picnics in the park, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. We started dating, casually at first, but with an undeniable spark. With Olivia, I felt seen, appreciated, and valued for who I was, not for what I could do for her. It was a refreshing change from the constant pressure and expectations of my marriage. I was creating some of my best work, fueled by my newfound happiness and the support of Olivia and Liam. My art was evolving, becoming bolder, more expressive, more me. Victoria, however, felt the pressure. She was starting to drown in it. One particular project had run into major issues. Numbers were not adding up, and she knew it. The confidence she had shown in my apartment when we split was nowhere to be found. She tried to fix it, but felt a heavy weight of dread in her stomach. The Henderson account, once Victoria's shining beacon of opportunity, had become a swirling vortex of disaster. Technical glitches, seemingly minor at first, had cascaded into major system failures. Deadlines, once confidently projected, were now slipping past with alarming speed. The budget, meticulously planned, was hemorrhaging money, each day bringing a fresh wave of unexpected costs. Victoria, initially the composed captain steering the ship, now felt like a lone sailor clinging to a splintered mast in a raging storm. She worked around the clock, fueled by endless cups of bitter coffee and a growing sense of dread. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated. Her tailored suits were creased, her hair unkempt, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She tried to rally her team, to troubleshoot the issues, to find solutions, but the problems were systemic, deeply rooted in flawed planning and unrealistic expectations. Expectations she had, in her initial ambition, helped to create. Mr. Harrison, once her champion, had become her tormentor. His emails were curt, laced with veiled threats. His phone calls were worse, his booming voice echoing through her office, a constant reminder of her impending failure. "This is unacceptable, Victoria," he'd roared during one particularly brutal call. "Fix it, or your career here is over." The threat hung over her like a guillotine blade. She knew he meant it. Harrison had a reputation for ruthlessness, for discarding employees who no longer served his purpose. The pressure was crushing, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. The summons to Mr. Harrison's office arrived like a death knell. Victoria walked the long corridor, her heels clicking on the polished floor, each step echoing the pounding of her heart. The office, with its panoramic view of the London skyline, had once represented the pinnacle of her ambition. Now, it felt like a cage. Harrison didn't bother with pleasantries. He sat behind his massive desk, his face a mask of cold disapproval. "The Henderson account is a disaster, Victoria," he stated flatly. A complete and utter failure. Victoria tried to explain, to outline the steps she was taking to mitigate the damage, but he cut her off. "Excuses," he sneered. "I don't want excuses, I want results. And frankly, I've lost faith in your ability to deliver them." His words were like a physical blow. Victoria felt her carefully constructed facade of competence crumble. She stammered, trying to defend her work, her team, her leadership, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Meanwhile, Marcus, her erstwhile rival and now apparent colleague, saw his opportunity. He had been subtly undermining Victoria for weeks, planting seeds of doubt in Mr. Harrison's mind, offering alternative solutions, positioning himself as the savior of the project. He'd even gone so far as to borrow some of Victoria's preliminary analysis, tweaking it slightly and presenting it as his own. During a crucial meeting, with the project spiraling further out of control, Marcus stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice smooth and confident, "I've been reviewing the situation, and I believe I have a solution, a different approach that can salvage the Henderson account." He then proceeded to outline a plan that was, in essence, a repackaged version of Victoria's initial strategy, but with a few key modifications that made it appear innovative, and crucially, his. Mr. Harrison listened intently, his expression shifting from skepticism to grudging admiration. Victoria watched in disbelief, her stomach churning with a mixture of anger and despair. She tried to interject, to point out the similarities between Marcus's plan and her own, but Harrison silenced her with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Enough, Victoria," he said. "Marcus has presented a viable path forward. You, on the other hand, have delivered nothing but failure." The betrayal stung more than the professional setback. She had trusted Marcus, confided in him, even considered him a potential ally in the cutthroat corporate environment. She had been utterly naive. In her desperation, a flicker of a thought she'd been suppressing ignited. Daniel. She hadn't thought about him. Contacted him. The old pang of guilt resurfaced, but it was quickly overshadowed by a desperate need for a lifeline. Any lifeline. Back in her lonely apartment, Victoria reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts, finding Daniel's number. It had been months since they'd spoken. She hesitated, then pressed the call button. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again the next day and the next. Finally, she left a message. Her voice cracked, her carefully rehearsed words dissolving into a rambling, incoherent plea. "Daniel, it's me, Victoria. I know I messed up. I'm so sorry. Things are really bad here. I don't know what to do." She trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of her despair, the desperate hope that he might somehow rescue her. She didn't ask him to come back, not explicitly, but the unspoken plea hung heavy in the air. The final blow came swiftly and brutally. Mr. Harrison called another meeting, this time with the entire project team present. He announced, with a chilling lack of emotion, that Marcus would be taking over the leadership of the Henderson account. Victoria sat frozen, her face burning with humiliation. The looks from her colleagues ranged from pity to thinly veiled schadenfreude. She felt utterly exposed, her failure laid bare for all to see. The official firing happened the next day, a private meeting with Mr. Harrison that was even more brutal than she'd anticipated. "Victoria," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth or empathy, "your performance has been unacceptable. The Henderson account is in shambles, and frankly, I no longer have any confidence in your abilities." He handed her a formal termination letter, outlining the terms of her dismissal. Her contract was being terminated, effective immediately. "I understand the challenges," Victoria began, her voice trembling. "Challenges?" Harrison interrupted, his voice rising. "You call this a challenge? This is a catastrophe. and it's a catastrophe of your making." He refused to listen to her explanations, to acknowledge the systemic issues that had contributed to the project's failure. He was focused solely on finding a scapegoat, and Victoria was it. Within an hour, she was escorted out of the building by security, her access badge confiscated, her career in tatters. The walk of shame, past the curious and pitying gazes of her former colleagues, was the most agonizing experience of her life. Back in her apartment, the reality of her situation crashed down on her. She was unemployed, alone, and thousands of miles from home. The life she had so meticulously built, the career she had sacrificed everything for, had vanished in an instant. She packed her belongings, the once stylish apartment now feeling like a prison, the designer clothes, the expensive furniture, the symbols of her success, now mocked her. She had nothing left. As she stared at the overflowing boxes, a wave of despair washed over her. She sank to the floor, burying her face in her hands, and sobbed uncontrollably. The tears were a mixture of grief, regret, and a profound sense of loss. With no job prospects and her savings dwindling rapidly, Victoria booked a one-way ticket back to her old city. She had nowhere else to go. The flight was a long, agonizing journey, filled with self-recrimination and a growing sense of dread. During the flight, she couldn't resist the urge to check social media. It was a mistake. Scrolling through her feed, she stumbled upon Daniel's online art shop. His paintings, vibrant and full of life, were a stark contrast to her own bleak reality. The glowing reviews, praising his talent and originality, were like salt in her wounds. Then she found Olivia's gallery website. There it was, an announcement for Daniel's upcoming solo exhibition. A photo of Daniel, smiling confidently, stood next to a striking piece of abstract art. He looked happy, truly happy. She clicked on another link, finding a local news article about Daniel's rising success, and there, in a photo accompanying the article, was Daniel with Olivia, their arms around each other, their faces radiant with joy. The reality of her situation hit her with full force. Daniel had moved on. He had not only survived without her, he had thrived. He had found happiness, success, and love, while she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her ambition. Landing back in her old city felt like a defeat. She had no job, no home, and no prospects. She couldn't face her family, not yet. The shame was too overwhelming. Her first instinct was to reach out to Sarah, hoping for a familiar voice, a comforting presence. She dialed Sarah's number, her hand shaking. "Sarah, it's Victoria." Sarah's voice was polite, but distant. "Victoria, hi." I'm back in town," Victoria said, her voice hesitant. "I was wondering, could we meet?" There was a pause. "I'm really busy, Victoria, and frankly, I'm not sure what there is to talk about." I need a friend," Victoria pleaded, her voice cracking. "Daniel's been through a lot," Sarah said gently, but firmly. "I'm his friend, Victoria, and I'm not going to do anything that might hurt him." The call ended shortly after, leaving Victoria feeling even more isolated. She realized that she had burned her bridges, alienated the people who had once cared about her. Finally, with nowhere else to turn, Victoria decided to contact Daniel directly. She crafted an email, carefully choosing her words, trying to strike a balance between apology and desperation. "Daniel," she wrote, "I know I have no right to ask this, but I was wondering if we could meet. I'm back in town and I need to talk to you. I'm so sorry for everything. Please, just give me a chance to explain." She sent the email, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread, setting the stage for the inevitable confrontation. She was no longer the powerful, confident woman who had left for London. She was a beggar, returning with nothing but regret. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, nestled between a newsletter from an art supply company and an invitation to a gallery opening. The subject line was simply my name, Daniel. My heart rate, usually steady and calm these days, quickened. I knew even before opening it who it was from. Victoria. I stared at the screen for a long moment, a mixture of emotions churning within me: anger, resentment, a flicker of curiosity, and surprisingly a dull ache of pity. I hadn't expected to hear from her. Not like this. I'd envisioned a future encounter, perhaps years down the line, where I'd be the picture of success, and she'd be... Well, I hadn't quite figured out that part. But it certainly hadn't involved her asking to meet me, sounding defeated and apologetic. I almost deleted the email. I really did. What good could come from dredging up the past? I was happy now. I had my art, my friends, Olivia. I had a life I loved. Why risk disrupting that peace? But another part of me, the part that had loved Victoria for 7 years, the part that had always tried to understand her, to see the good in her, couldn't quite let it go. I needed closure, perhaps. Or maybe I just needed to see for myself that she truly understood the damage she had caused. I discussed it with Olivia that evening. We were sitting on the sofa in my apartment, the remnants of a take-out Thai dinner on the coffee table. My apartment, once bare and echoing, now felt warm and inviting, filled with my artwork, Olivia's plants, and the comfortable clutter of a shared life. I don't know what to do, I admitted, running a hand through my hair. Part of me wants to just ignore it, but... Olivia, ever insightful, placed a calming hand on my arm. But you need to see her, don't you? I nodded. I think so. Not for her, but for me. To finally close that chapter. Then do it, she said, her voice soft but firm. But do it on your terms. Don't let her manipulate you, Daniel. You've come too far. Her words gave me the strength I needed. I replied to Victoria's email, agreeing to meet, but I chose the location. A small, quiet cafe near my apartment, a neutral space with no emotional baggage. I set the time for Saturday afternoon, giving myself a few days to prepare, and I limited the meeting to 1 hour. I wanted to be in control, to set boundaries, to protect myself. Saturday arrived with a crisp autumn chill. I dressed casually, jeans, a comfortable sweater, a stylish scarf Olivia had given me, a far cry from the stiff, corporate-compliant attire I used to wear to appease Victoria. I felt calm, surprisingly so. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say, but I also knew that I needed to be open to whatever happened. I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, choosing a table near the window. I ordered a black coffee and watched the people stroll by, a mix of couples, families, and solitary individuals, each with their own stories, their own triumphs and struggles. Then I saw her. Victoria. She was standing outside the cafe, looking hesitant, almost lost. She was dressed simply dark jeans, a plain sweater, a far cry from the power suits and designer dresses she used to favor. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore little to no makeup. She looked Chao-Kui haggard, worn down. The vibrant, confident woman I remembered was gone, replaced by a shadow of her former self. She saw me and took a deep breath, pushing open the cafe door. The bell above the door jingled, announcing her arrival. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the years melted away. I saw a flicker of the woman I had loved, the woman I had thought I knew, but it was quickly replaced by a look of vulnerability, of defeat that I'd never seen before. Daniel, she said, her voice soft and hesitant. Thank you for meeting me. Victoria, I replied, my voice calm and even. Have a seat. She sat down, her movements stiff and awkward. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words, with the weight of our shared history. "You look different," she said, finally breaking the silence. "So do you," I replied, a hint of irony in my voice. She fidgeted with her hands, avoiding my gaze. I saw your website. Your art, it's amazing." This was her attempt at a peace offering, I realized, a compliment on my art, something she had rarely acknowledged, let alone praised, during our marriage. "Thank you," I said, my tone neutral. "I always knew you were talented," she continued, her voice gaining a bit of strength. I didn't realize—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I waited, letting the silence do the work for me. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Daniel," she said, finally meeting my gaze. "A lot of really big mistakes." Her apology, when it came, felt hollow, rehearsed. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was so focused on my career, on achieving my goals, that I didn't realize what I was losing. I lost my job, Daniel, everything. I came back here with nothing." She was focusing on her losses, her pain. Not once did she acknowledge the pain she had inflicted on me, the years of neglect and emotional abandonment. I listened patiently, letting her speak. I watched her, observing the subtle shifts in her expression, the way she avoided my eyes when she spoke about her failures, the way her hands trembled when she talked about her regrets. "I know I can't undo the past," she continued, her voice cracking. "But I was hoping, maybe we could start over. I've changed, Daniel. I've learned my lesson." Here it was. The plea for reconciliation, the moment I'd been bracing myself for. Just then, as if on cue, Olivia walked into the cafe. She'd said she might stop by for lunch, and I'd, perhaps subconsciously, chosen a time when I knew she might be there. Olivia's presence was a grounding force. She saw me, saw Victoria, and a flicker of understanding crossed her face. She approached our table, her smile warm and genuine. "Daniel?" she said, her voice light and cheerful. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I replied, standing up to greet her. I introduced them. "Olivia, this is Victoria. Victoria, this is Olivia." The two women exchanged polite but cool greetings. Victoria's face, already pale, seemed to lose even more color. The reality of my new life, of my happiness without her, was undeniable. Olivia, ever perceptive, sensed the tension in the air. "I can come back later," she offered, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "No, stay," I said, my gaze firmly fixed on Victoria. This was my moment, my chance to finally speak my truth. I turned back to Victoria. "I appreciate you coming here, Victoria," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "And I forgive you for everything, but I can't go back. I've moved on. I'm happy now." I gestured towards Olivia. "I've found someone who loves and supports me, who values me for who I am, not for what I can do for her." Victoria's eyes welled up with tears, but this time they were tears of genuine despair, not self-pity. I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry for what happened to you, Victoria," I said, a flicker of genuine sympathy crossing my heart. "But I'm not responsible for your happiness. You need to find that within yourself." "I know," she said, her voice choked with emotion. She stood up, her movements shaky. I had to try." She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at me with a mixture of sadness and regret. "You were right, Daniel. I did give up on us. And I lost the best thing that ever happened to me." And then she was gone. I sat back down, feeling a mixture of relief and a lingering sadness. Olivia took my hand, her touch grounding and reassuring. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes filled with concern. "Yeah," I said, a genuine smile finally reaching my lips. "I am. I really am." We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the people come and go. The cafe, once a stage for my confrontation with the past, now felt like a peaceful sanctuary. Victoria's breakdown, though unseen by me, happened in her car, a lonely parked car on the street corner. She lashed out at the wheel. She screamed, she cried, and then finally there was just empty silence, in contrast to the warmth Daniel now felt.